I used to think that step 10 was the inventory for the entire day. Until one day I heard somebody say something about an 11-step inventory, and it just went, something I overheard somebody else saying, like, they don't know what they're talking about, 11-step inventory. And then over the years, I went to the seminar, I think I went there 3 times, and I followed a couple of guys around while they did the steps out of the big book. And I later learned that there is an 11-step inventory. And that the difference between the 2 inventories is, I don't know why there's a difference and why they separate the 2, but I imagine there would be an event that happened in the middle of the day in which I needed to take an inventory to get rid of that right then and there. I was told that there was 2 types of inventories. There's the spot check inventory and there's the end of the day inventory. So step 11 is on like 2 pages. The whole, definition of step 11. It's right after step 10 on like page 85. I mean, not 185, but if I can find it. 86. It begins on 85 and it's on 86, 87, and what's left of 88. Step 11, page 85, into action. Now remember, in step 10, it actually tells you when to take the inventory of the 10th step. It says, as we go along. And that's the only directions in there describing when to do this. It just says, I'll read it real quick. It says, this thought brings us to step 10, right after the promises of the 9th step says, they'll always materialize if we work with them. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personnel inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. So basically what they're saying is, after you've done the 4th step and the following steps of 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9, to face, in the 3rd step it says, to face and be rid of the things that are blocking you from doing God's will. To go back and look at that, the reason it says that is you look at the 3rd step. When I remember, the 3rd step was the turning point in my sobriety. When I finally looked at the 3rd step, and that's all I can give you is my experience with the steps over the years. I remember looking at the 3rd step. I was in the jail for probably my 3rd or 4th time, 4 months, 6 months, 5 months, 8 months. I was always in there for some stupid something or other. And I was looking at the 3rd step on the wall. They had painted it on the walls up there. And it came across me. I said, I get it now. I finally understand what the 3rd step is saying. But what I didn't get was the 3rd step was not the act of turning my will and my life over to the care of God. It was only the decision to do that. It was the following steps that were going to be the action steps, the process in which I do this turning of my will over to the care of God. I can't just say, somebody says to me, it's real simple. You just go out and you do things for other people. And I walk out the door and I say, got it. It doesn't work like that. Because there can still be selfish motives behind the way I do things for other people, because I expect something in return, and if they don't appreciate what I did to them, then I'm not going to do anything for them ever again. And there's a lot of selfish things in my life that I've learned over the years. I mean, selfishness was something that took me, I would have to say, the 26 years before I got sober to refine and hone my skills of selfishness and self-centeredness. And there was more involved in just the knowledge. Somebody said knowledge of recovery is not recovery. I think Jim B. said that. Knowledge of recovery is not recovery. It must be followed by the action outlined in the knowledge that you've learned. So in the 3rd step it says that though your decision was a vital and crucial step, this decision of the 3rd step, it will have little permanent effect unless at once followed by the 4th step, a strenuous effort to face it. Actually it's 4 through 9. The steps 4 through 9 are a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things that are keeping me from doing God's will. There's this general idea of all of these steps that there's self-will, which is wrong, admitted our wrongs, continued to admit our wrongs when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Self-will is wrong, and God's will is right. And the 3rd step, or the 4th step, is to write these things down. And the way the 4th step is putting it is that there are 4 things, 4 chief, what are we calling them in here? The 4 cardinal defects. In the 4th step it says, I got it in my head, it's just eluding me for a second here. the common manifestations of self. It says in the big book here, it says, that's the third step. Where am I? We considered its common manifestations. Being convinced that self manifested in various ways was what had defeated us, we considered its common manifestations. So these four things that we're looking at in the fourth step are the common manifestations of self. I like to call them the four most common, because there really literally are hundreds of them, but somebody once said that I overheard them say was that they really will fall into one of these four categories, and if they don't, then we're really not too concerned with them. Just stick with these four and everything's going to be just fine. You're going to be able to work through the fears that we're going to be getting to here. And the reason I'm going back to the third and the fourth steps is because basically within the 11th step are all of those steps. Just like in the 10th step, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 are all in step 10 right there. When you're doing step 10, you've lumped all of those steps into one little process of, the way it puts it, to find and be rid of the things that are blocking me from doing God's will. Our liquor was but a symptom, so we had to get down to causes and conditions. That's the third step. But back to the 11th step on 85, the bottom of 85. It's going to be the same inventory. I overheard someone say that the fourth step, 4 through 9, are to clean up the wreckage of the past, and steps 10 and 11, the inventories of steps 10 and 11, are to clean up the wreckage as we go along. That's the way it's put in the 10th step. This thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. The mistakes that we're talking about here are, once again, selfishness. It took me so many years to refine and hone this selfishness that I didn't even know that I had. And these are the mistakes that we're looking at. And one of the things I like to bring up, Joe and Charlie used to always say, take a look at the steps, because there was years where I looked at those steps and I saw something different in every one of those steps. When I saw that moral inventory, I had no idea what they were talking about, first of all. And then I saw in step 5 the exact nature of my wrongs, the defects of my character, my shortcomings, and all these harms. I thought they were all something different. That somehow, man, this was going to be one hell of a list. This was going to be overwhelming. It was too much. I just couldn't do it. And then they said, it's the same thing. Every one of those is speaking of the same 4 common manifestations of self. And doing 4 through 9 gives us the experience and the knowledge of doing this inventory, and it's something that we're going to be doing every day. And that is the process of 10 and 11 here. Now, 11 doesn't say anything about an inventory up there on the board. All it really says is that we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood Him, praying only for the knowledge of His will for us. But that's one of the key things up there, is this understanding that I'm going to ask God what He wants me to do. Okay? I could sit around and pray for, things for other people. I could pray for this and pray for that. My personal opinion is, and maybe no one doesn't agree, maybe not many people will agree with me, but there's really not much sense in praying for all that stuff, because it's in essence, it's me telling God how to run things, the way I look at it. If I say, God, I think this ought to happen, and when it doesn't happen, I get mad about it or something. Or, this person should get sober, that person shouldn't die from cancer, those people shouldn't have died in that car accident, whatever it was. It's basically, in my opinion, me telling God how to run His show here, okay? And if you look at the step right there, the 11th step says, only pray only. It doesn't say, well, pray also for the knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out. It says pray only. Pray only for the knowledge of God's will for me. I'm going to be running what it is that I think He wants me to do, and I'm going to let God run everything else. My aunt's cancer, the car accidents, the tsunamis killing 200,000 people, that ain't none of my damn business. That's God's job. I can't even run my own life, and here I'm going to tell God, hey, you know what I think you ought to do? Not kill 200,000 people in the next tidal wave. Maybe, just a couple of hundred or something. That ain't none of my damn job. My job, I can't even figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do most of the time. But I got it whittled down to, this is the way it works, this inventory. The inventory to find and be rid of what's blocking me from doing what God wants me to do, which is, and back to the idea of what these 12 steps is all about, is about God's will and self-will. And the understanding, see, that was one of my questions early on. I didn't understand what God's will was. So I went around to some of the smarter guys that I'd come across in meetings, with 20, 30 years of sobriety or something. And I have to admit, some of those guys had no idea what it was either. And it showed when they gave me the answer that they had, which was beating around the bush and just, they would say things like, I tell you what one guy said to me. He said, nobody really knows what God's will is. It's different for each and every one of us. You have to go along throughout your life and figure it out as you go along. And I scratched my head and I said, yeah, that made a lot of sense. But at the time I didn't realize he had no idea what the hell he was talking about. Because eventually I came across somebody who did know what God's will was. He was a real religious guy. He still is. He goes around with the religion thing and all that. But that's fine. I ain't got nothing against that. That's not for me, But I tell you, he had some really good ideas. And one of them was, he said, look, God's will is simple. God's will is very easy. You were supposed to be somebody, and you weren't that person. That's all there is to it. So now, God's will for me is I should have been who I was supposed to be all along. And this process of being rid of selfishness and self-centeredness is going to help me to become who I should have been. Maybe I won't ever, I've been set back a few years, 13, 20 years, whatever the hell it was. But I'm going to do the best I can to make up for lost time and to become the person that I should have been all along, there are certain people that died. My grandparents died while I was using. And I'll never be able to show them that I wasn't just some drunken bum who stole and lied and cheated my way through the family. But I can still make up for it by doing the right thing from now on. And it's hard to do the right thing when your head is still full of self. And that's what the idea here is, to find and be rid of these things that are blocking me from doing things for other people. The other people thing is the God's will thing. I fill that in there because that's what one of the guys I ran across came up with that. And I said, you know what? I don't know for sure, but I think that's pretty damn close to it. I think that's pretty close to the God's will thing. And I've been sticking to that ever since, better part of 8 years now, 8 or 9 years. So, I'm going to read step 11 here real quick. It's 2 pages. It won't take long at all. And I'll go back to it and highlight some of the important stuff in here. On the bottom of page 85, right after step 10, which is like a page, if that, page and a half. Step 11 suggests prayer and meditation. We shouldn't be shy on this matter of prayer. Better men than we are using it constantly. It works. If we have the proper attitude and work at it, it would be easy to be vague about this matter. Yet we believe we can make some definite and valuable suggestions. Now here he is saying, before you pray and meditate, this is what you're going to do. When you retire at night, you constructively review your day. Were you resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Those 4 things, the same 4 things in the 10th step, the same 4 things in the 4th step. The same 4 things that we learned in those steps, 4 through 9, how to face and be rid of them. Not just to make this negative list of this garbage that was in our lives, but to be rid of it too. To apply what we call a spiritual solution to it. To apply forgiveness to our resentments. When we're angry at somebody, we must forgive them because we're the ones who are suffering for it. When I am afraid of something, I must have faith in God that He's going to take care of everything. And those fears will fall from me when I do what I think God wants me to do. And I'm thinking about other people, and this self-centered fear is what the idea is, that those fears are all based in self. So when those self-centered fears begin to fall from me, then they're not taking up all that time in my head. And that time that's freed up in my head is going to be much clearer to get the right answer. That's the whole idea behind this, is to clear up all that stuff in my head that's blocking me from getting God's vision in my head. And which is basically just do things for other people. It ain't like some white light thing that's I'm going to have a white beard and everything come out of it or anything. It's going to end up just me thinking, hey, I can do things for other people and it won't really devastate my life. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't have a life if it wasn't for this. I'd probably be sleeping out in the woods out there and be a mess, My whole life would still be a mess. Instead of just the little parts that are now. Back to, this is the 4th step. Were we resentful? In the 11th step, this is the 4th step. Were we resentful, selfish, dishonest, or afraid? Isn't that step 4? Do we owe an apology? That's steps 8 and 9, to find the people you owe an apology to and to do it. Have we kept something to ourselves which should be discussed with another person at once? There's step 5. Were we kind and loving toward all? These are, I have written here, somebody, I believe it was Jim B., said that these are the 10 questions of the inventory to answer in this 11th step. So it is a little different than the 4th step in that you're going to answer these questions. Whereas in the list of harms done others, some of these questions are in there. Were we kind and loving toward all? What could we have done better? Were we thinking of ourselves most of the time, or were we thinking of what we could do for others? Of what we could pack into the stream of life? But we must be careful not to drift into worry, remorse, or morbid reflection, for that would diminish our usefulness to others. After making our review, we ask God's forgiveness and inquire what corrective measures should be taken. Ask God's forgiveness. That would be like step 6 and 7. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. This is the morning inventory. Not the morning inventory, but the morning prayer, I guess it would be. On awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead. We consider our plans for the day. Before we begin, we ask God to direct our thinking, especially asking that it be divorced from self-pity, dishonest, or self-seeking motives. Under these conditions, we can employ our mental faculties with assurance, for after all, God gave us brains to use. Our thought life would be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. That is the whole idea behind the inventory. That one little simple statement. Our thought life would be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. It's that simple. That's all there is to it. Remember that one of the things I used to always say, well, if it's so simple, how come nobody ever makes it? You know, so few people actually stay sober. I went through a halfway house with a turnover of 100 guys every month, and I still haven't seen anybody else that made it. And that's the damn truth. Well, actually, the guy that sold me that truck I'm driving was at Maroney Chevrolet about 7 years ago, and he said he was still sober. But that's like one guy out of several hundred, 500 or 600. Our thought life would be placed on a much higher plane when our thinking is cleared of wrong motives. In thinking about our day, we may face indecision. We may not be able to determine which course to take. Here we ask God for inspiration, an intuitive thought or a decision. We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers will come when we have tried this for a while. That's the whole idea right there. You find and be rid of selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. Apply the solution to them to where they're no longer taking up all that time in my head. And when I turn to God and say, God, what do you want me to do? It's not going to be, kill that guy, drive him off the road. And it's not going to be, take what you can get whatever you can get out from everybody, which is what it used to be, you know. Everybody owes me something. The world owes me a living. It's going to be something more like, you know, I'm starting to realize that my reason for living may very well be to do things for God, you know. If He came down and just made things happen, we'd all be locked up in a loony bin somewhere saying, well, God did it for me, you know. But someone said God works through people, and I believe that's pretty much how simple it is. It really is. Now, it's up to me whether or not I'm going to go out and do what I believe He wants me to do, which is very simple. Remember what I was saying, I should have been somebody, and I was not that person. I was lying to people that I cared about, that cared about me. I was stealing from them. And now it's time to turn all that stuff around and do things for other people, you know. And to give you, you know, everybody knows what it is. I mean, if you don't, it's real simple. I got an extreme version of it, and that is, the extreme version is that my only reason for living today, I found out where self got me. It was a desperation and an end-of-life type thing where I decided, well, if this is what life is about, I would rather not. So here I am. I've been, I don't know if you'd call it reborn or something, but I got a whole new attitude and outlook upon life, and selfishness and self-centeredness has slipped away from me, and the thought of other people has come into my head, and I'm thinking today that my only reason for living may very well be to do things for other people, whatever it is I can. I still have to pay my rent and buy food and put on some clothes and drive a vehicle, but the only reason I do that is so when I get the opportunity to do something for somebody, I'll be there. I won't be some bum, you know, who's walking down the street with nothing. But that's the reason I do all those things today. And it may not be perfect right now, but I'm starting to get this more and more. And I believe that's where we're all supposed to be headed. Is this idea that, you know, we were all created for something, and I definitely was not on that path. That's all there was to it. Where was I? We relax and take it easy. We don't struggle. We are often surprised how the right answers will come after we have tried this for a while. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. Being still inexperienced and having just made conscious contact with God, it is not probable that we are going to be inspired all the time. We might pay for this presumption in all sorts of absurd actions and ideas. Nevertheless, we find that our thinking will, as time passes, be more and more on the plane of inspiration. We come to rely upon it. We usually conclude the period of meditation with a prayer that will be shown all through the day, what our next step is to be. That we be given whatever we need to take care of such problems. We ask especially for freedom from self-will. We are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves, however, if others will be helped. We are careful never to pray for our own selfish ends. Many of us have wasted a lot of time doing that, and it doesn't work, and you can easily see why. That is the 11th-step prayer. Many people will have you think that the St. Francis prayer of Assisi, which is in the 12 and 12, is the 11th-step prayer, and it isn't. The 11th-step prayer is right there. It says, we ask especially for freedom from self-will, and are careful to make no request for ourselves only. We may ask for ourselves. It's pretty much that simple, just like the 3rd-step prayer and the 7th-step prayer. God, relieve me of the bondage of self so that I may better do your will, which is to do things for other people. And the 11th-step prayer is, that St. Francis prayer of Assisi is a really good prayer, and I would never attempt to say that that's wrong or it shouldn't do that. But what I usually say when I come to those 11-step meetings is, that's really great. Okay, let's take one of those many things and say, where there is light or where there is darkness, I may bring light. Okay, how are you going to do that? Tell me the process of exactly what you're going to do to bring light where there's darkness. Because there really is no process in here. There's nothing about that. What there is here, however, is to stop thinking about myself all the time and do things for other people. And that's how... Now, those things in the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi may very well come into my life as this begins to work. And I begin to think more and more of other people and do things for other people. That might be the outcome, the eventual outcome. Just like... it's really good that they have those principles behind the steps, honesty, and whatever they are. You can name them off pretty quick, but brotherly love and faith and all those things are not the principles behind the steps. They may very well be byproducts that will come into your life if the steps are done properly, but to take one step and say this is what that step is about is completely wrong. The 4th step is not about honesty or whatever it is. The 4th step is about an inventory to face and be rid of the things that are blocking. That's how simple it is. And Jim B. we used to say that the principle of the 4th step is a daily inventory, or the inventory of the past to find and be rid of the things that are blocking you from doing God's will. That is the principle. You can't have an underlying principle to it. That's all there is to it. How can you have a principle behind a principle? It just doesn't exist. That's what he used to say. And I believe that today. I believe the principle behind the 5th step is to take your 4th step to somebody and tell them, I'm full of self. I am selfish. I am dishonest. I am afraid. I am resentful. That's what the 5th step says. It doesn't say admit that you killed somebody or admit that you blew something up or something like that, set fire to a couple of buildings or something. It says that you admit resentment, selfishness, dishonesty, and fear. That's what it says. That's all it says. If it falls into one of those categories, maybe you ought to put it in that category, though, and not leave it out of the inventory. Back to the reading, where was I? It was the 11th-step prayer. If circumstances warrant, we ask our wives or friends to join us in morning meditation. If we belong to a religious denomination which requires a definite morning devotion, we attend to that also. If not members of religious bodies, we sometimes select and memorize a few set prayers which emphasize the principles we have been discussing. There are many helpful books also. Suggestions about these may be obtained from one's priest, minister, or rabbi. Be quick to see where religious people are right. Make use of what they offer. As we go through the day, we pause, when agitated or doubtful, and ask for the right thought or action. We constantly remind ourselves we are no longer running the show, humbly saying to ourselves many times each day, Thy will be done. We are then in much less danger of excitement, fear, anger, worry, self-pity, or foolish decisions, we become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly. And he's saying we're not burning up energy foolishly, thinking about all these resentments that are going in my head. I'm going to kill this one, I'm going to run that one off the road, I'm going to do this and do that and get even. And I'm not thinking of all the fears that are going on in my head. The fears that I'm going to lose my job, I'm going to get kicked out of my apartment, I'm going to crash my truck, my family's going to die of cancer. And all these things, they just don't exist. They're not there. But here I am rolling that damn thing downhill, and it's getting bigger and bigger. We become much more efficient. We do not tire so easily, for we are not burning up energy foolishly, as we did when we were trying to arrange life to suit ourselves. It works. It really does. We alcoholics are undisciplined, so we let God discipline us in the simple way we have just outlined. But this is not all. There is action and more action. Faith without works is dead. There it is, that thing you're reading all the time. Faith without works is dead. The next chapter is entirely devoted to the 12th step, step 12, which is chapter 7, working with others. There's 15 pages in that chapter. Is it coincidence that right after I do my inventory to find and be rid of the 4 common manifestations of self, resentment, fear, selfishness, and dishonesty, I apply the solution to those. I turn to God in this 11th step. I turn to God and I say, what do you want me to do? Is it coincidence that the very next step is step 12? I think not. I think it was there for a reason. And look what step 12 says. It says, having had a spiritual awakening. I'm not doing step 12 tonight. We'll do it next week. But I believe that all these steps are very closely related to one another. They're not individual steps to me anymore. They're more like 12 parts of the one step. Is all they are. So it's important for me to bring up other steps around it to explain how that one step is intended to work in my recovery. So is it coincidence that step 12 is followed immediately after step 11? It follows step 11. And look what it says. It says that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. And I have to ask myself, I used to think to myself all the time, spiritual awakening, what is it, like Moses, he went up there with dark hair and came back and his beard was white and his hair was all slicked back and he had these tablets and he had a spiritual awakening. And no, the spiritual awakening of the 12 steps is no secret. We just went over it. It's a simple thing. The spiritual awakening is that God did not create me to think about myself all the time and to live my life in this world as if I'm going to take what I can from everybody and get what I can in this life. He made me to be there. I was supposed to go from a child to an adult, and that never took place. It never took place. When it was supposed to take place, someone said, "Here, take a drink of this." And for about 13 years, I was drinking of that, and I just never did grow up. I never made the transition from thinking about myself all the time. That's what my first sponsor said. What would be the characteristics that you would say would be exhibited by a child? And that would be fear, and resentment, anger. Children are angry. Children are selfish. That's what we're saying here. The inventory is resentment, fear, selfishness, dishonesty. Those can be almost categorically said to be exhibited by children, So there I was. I was an adult, still exhibiting the behavior of a child. Never made the transition to this adult behavior. And I used to say, my grandparents really exhibited this behavior in my life. When I spent time with them, I would go up there in the summers and spend the whole summer with them. And as I got older, I spent a couple of years with them and growing up there and doing whatever I was doing in Tennessee. And I remember thinking at times that they had more concern and more care for my life than they did their own. I had felt that if there was some situation in which our lives were in danger, they would have gotten between me and that danger. And that's how it seems to me that adult behavior is, that someone actually cares for other people to that point. Instead of the way I was, I would have stepped out of the way and let anybody, just get whatever it was. I would have never made an attempt to risk my life to save somebody else or do anything for anybody else. Consciously. I don't know if it would have happened, spontaneously, like some heroes say, well, I don't know, I just did it. Anybody would have done it when they do something for somebody else and risk their own lives to save somebody else. But I can tell you that looking back on it, I wouldn't have done it. I would have said, we're going to bury you, not me. That's all there is to it. So, the idea is, where was I? I got lost again. Having had the spiritual awakening, that's where I was. the spiritual awakening is that I was selfish and self-centered and thinking only of myself. That's not what God intended me to do. Is that not a spiritual awakening? I now see that God wants me to be there for the people in my life. I now see that I should have grown into an adult and taken my place in my family, in my community, at my place where I was working, and all the aspects of my life. I was not becoming that person. I was still thinking only of myself. When I went to work, I didn't go to work to serve the community. I went to work to make a paycheck, and sometimes I couldn't stand what I was doing. And that, the longer I've been sober, sometimes it doesn't matter what I'm doing at work. I could be doing any number of things that probably would have irritated me years ago. But I'm thinking, I'm serving the community. I build houses for a living. I fix tools. I fix generators and air compressors and guns. And every time I'm fixing something or building a house or whatever it is I do, sometimes I walk with building code inspectors, and we want to take a shovel and bury the guy in the backyard. We're like, he's got his own little building code he's writing as we're going through the houses or something. I don't know where he's getting this stuff. But a lot of the times, I'm thinking to myself, just do what he says and finish the house and get out of it. And it's a way of serving the community. It's the reason that when I go to work, I no longer go there for that paycheck. It's an added benefit. That paycheck that I get is an added benefit. I serve the community now. It's a whole new attitude and outlook upon life that I've gained from these steps. And my whole life is like that. When I come to an AA meeting, I no longer come to an AA meeting to see what I can get out of it. I go to an AA meeting and I raise my hand and I see what I can put into it. I tell people things like, look, your sponsor told you to go to a meeting and dump. And I'm telling you that that's not what's in your best interest. And let me explain to you how. I heard somebody else say this. I think Jim B. said it 3 or 4 years ago, and he said, it works like this. It's never too soon for me to start thinking about working the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I got 2 days of sobriety, let's say. Is it too soon for me to start thinking about other people and doing things for other people? Well, you've only got 2 days. You still need to be selfish and self-centered and think only of yourself. You don't need to think about other people right now. Why would you tell somebody something like that? So when you go to a meeting and you dump all over the people in that room and tell them all the problems, no one's going to give me a job, and my roommate stole my wallet, and I want my baba. That's what my first sponsor used to say a lot. I want my baba. So when you go to a meeting and you dump all over those people, that's what, when I hear somebody say their sponsor told them to do that, I go, hey, well, you got the wrong sponsor, pal. That's all there is to it. Why would it be too soon for you to start thinking about the people in that room and not give those things to God? Whatever it is that's bothering you, let God have all that stuff and don't dump it all over the people in that room. And that's what I raise my hand and say in meetings. I try not to be harsh about it and angry and resentful or anything, but try to be helpful and tell people, look, if you're starting to think about other people and what you can do for them, then what did you just do when you dumped all over everybody? You told them all your pain. Because I don't know about you guys, but when my sponsees call me, and I get 3 of them in a row call me, and they're going to give me the lowdown of the day, this, that, and this, and I stop and go, whoa, remember the inventory we went through? Well, that inventory is to face and be rid of every time it's always a fear that's involved or a resentment. Almost every time my sponsees call me, they start right off with, this guy at work, blah, 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 my roommate, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, you know what that sounds like? It sounds like a resentment to me. There's something you're afraid of. And they go, yeah, I guess you're right. And I said, well, remember what we were supposed to do with those things. You were supposed to face and be rid of them so that you could think about what God wanted you to do. And that's basically, in the 12th step is what I'm talking about now. We'll get into that next week a little more, but it's pretty much what I'm going to do. I'm just going to summarize how the other steps, come into play with the 12th step. Is that you, having had a spiritual awakening, that awakening is I was thinking only of myself and not of the people that were in my life. As a result of these steps, I tried to carry this message to alcoholics. What message? The message that I'm thinking only of myself and I don't care about other people, and it's time to grow up. It's time to stop that behavior. That is why I drank. I mean, something like that would be hard for me to understand if I was just freshly sober. And I heard somebody up there going, alcohol is not your problem. I came in here thinking it was. It might even have been a couple of years that I still thought alcohol was my problem before I actually heard somebody say it was only a symptom. It's a symptom of an underlying cause and condition is how it's put in the 3rd step. The 3rd step says our liquor was only a symptom, so we had to get down to the causes and conditions of why we drank. And it goes on to tell you that fear is the core reason why all alcoholics drink. And the fear comes in the other forms of resentment, which is all based in fear, and it comes in the forms of selfishness and dishonesty in the list of harms done others. And I find out later that that list of harms done others was all out of fear. All the harm that I created in my life, all the things that I did to the people that were in my lives was out of fear. Just basically out of fear of not getting what I want, losing what I had, and another drunken debacle, whatever you want to call it. So, try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all my affairs. And once again, we're back to those principles thing. It's not faith and hope and honesty and brotherly love and all. Those are byproducts that will come into my life, but they are not the core of the principles behind the steps. I usually say the same thing, like that the 11th step prayer that they read off. It's a great prayer. I'm not going to throw it under the bus. But how will you bring light where there's darkness? How will you comfort rather than to be comforted? Do you have an actual process of how you're going to do this? Have you thought about it? I mean, it doesn't give you any directions in there. It doesn't say, well, this is how you're going to do this. Start by doing this, step A, B, and C, and D on how to complete this project in your life. It doesn't do that. It gives you a lot of good things. I've hoped someday to be like that. But I can tell you that if you stay on this path of these steps, those will be the byproducts of what you receive. You won't have to sit down and go, how will I comfort rather than to be comforted? It will just be something that happens. That's all there is to it. It will be the byproduct of the steps. So where I was behind the principles behind it. Practice these principles in all of our affairs. Practice what principle? What is the principles? The principles are an inventory to face and be rid of what's blocking me from doing God's will. Apply the solution to it. Turn to God. Say, what do you want me to do? And then receive the right answer. If my house is in order, the right answers will come, is what it says at the end of the 12 steps, I believe, somewhere at the end of working with others here. One of those. I'm not a real big book thumper, but I got a lot of the steps outlined here. Practice the principles in all my affairs. The principles are the steps. The steps are the principles. I practice my inventory in all my affairs. That's what they're saying. Practice the inventory in all my affairs. When I'm at work, I look for when I'm resentful, when I'm afraid, and when I'm harming other people and being selfish and dishonest. When I'm in an AA meeting and something happens, I look for when I'm afraid. To practice the principles in all my affairs. Every aspect of my life throughout the day, I practice the principles of what? The inventory. To face and be rid of the things that are blocking me from doing things for other people. God's will.